The French Revolution didn't begin with rebellion. It began with bankruptcy. Think of the late 1700s. France is the superpower of Europe. Its army is feared, its culture is admired, and its king lives in the most magnificent palace on earth, Versailles. On the surface, France looks invincible, a golden empire at the height of its power. But behind the glittering facade, the kingdom was rotting from the inside out. It was drowning in debt. For centuries, French kings had fought one expensive war after another. The 7 Years' War, the Wars of Succession, and perhaps most ironically, funding the American Revolution. France helped America break free from a powerful monarch, but in doing so, it bankrupted its own. By the 1780s, the financial situation was catastrophic. The French government was spending more than half of its entire national income just paying the interest on its massive debts. Imagine that. Over 50% of every dollar or franc collected went straight to moneylenders before a single soldier was paid, a road was paved, or a school was built. The government wasn't governing anymore. It was just trying to stay afloat, juggling bills and borrowing more money to pay off old loans. The engine of the most powerful state in Europe was running on fumes, and it was about to seize completely. So where was the money supposed to come from? This is where the story turns from a financial crisis into a social time bomb. The problem wasn't just the spending. It was the tax system. A system so fundamentally broken, it seemed designed to create a revolution. In 18th century France, society was divided into 3 groups, or estates. The first estate was the clergy, the church. The second estate was the nobility, the aristocrats, dukes, and barons. Together, these 2 estates owned most of the land and held nearly all of the wealth. And yet, they paid almost no taxes. They were exempt, protected by centuries of privilege. So, who paid for everything? The third estate. This was everyone else, which meant over 97% of the population. It included wealthy merchants, lawyers, and doctors, but it was overwhelmingly made up of peasants, farmers, and urban laborers, the poorest and most vulnerable people in the kingdom. They bore the entire financial weight of the nation on their backs. They paid taxes on land, on salt, on the goods they sold, and on the bread they ate. While the court at Versailles hosted lavish balls and 1,000-course dinners, the people funding it all were often struggling to find their next meal. This wasn't just unfair. It was economic suffocation. The system wasn't just bending the common people, it was breaking them. As food became scarce and prices rose, the contrast between the starving poor and the feasting rich became an open wound. It was an explosion waiting for a spark. King Louis XVI wasn't entirely blind to the crisis. He knew the treasury was empty and that the nation was on the brink of collapse. He wasn't a tyrant, but he was indecisive and lacked the political strength to enact real change. He did try, though. He appointed a series of brilliant financial advisors like Turgot, Necker, and Calonne, who all came to the same simple conclusion: the only way to save France was to make the rich pay their fair share. They proposed radical new reforms, a universal land tax that applied to everyone, regardless of their social status. No more exemptions for nobles, no more privileges for the clergy. It was a logical, necessary solution. But every single time, the reforms were crushed. The privileged orders, the nobles, and high clergy used their immense power to block any changes that would touch their wallets. They controlled the regional courts, known as the parlements, and refused to register the king's new tax laws. They cried that their ancient rights were being violated. They organized, protested, and turned public opinion against the king's ministers. The elites who benefited most from the kingdom refused to do what was necessary to save it. They clung to their privileges so tightly that they were willing to let the entire nation go bankrupt. Boxed into a corner, with no other way to raise money, Louis XVI made a fateful decision. He decided to summon the Estates General. This was an ancient, medieval parliament made up of representatives from all 3 estates. It was a desperate move. The Estates General hadn't been called together in over 170 years. The king's hope was that this National Assembly would finally approve his tax reforms and rescue the economy. He thought he was solving a financial problem. Instead, he was about to ignite a political firestorm. When the representatives of the 3 estates gathered at Versailles in May 1789, the conversation quickly moved beyond taxes. The real question became, who holds the power in France? Who gets to decide the future of the nation? The third estate, representing the common people, came with a list of grievances and a powerful demand. They wanted a fair voice. Under the old rules, each estate got one vote. This meant the clergy and the nobility, representing a tiny fraction of the population, could always outvote the third estate 2-1. The representatives of the people demanded this change. They wanted voting by head, where their larger numbers would give them a real say. The king and the privileged orders hesitated, resisted, and tried to maintain the old ways. This was their fatal mistake. On June 17, 1789, the Third Estate did something revolutionary. Frustrated and locked out of their usual meeting hall, they gathered on a nearby tennis court and took a solemn oath. They declared themselves the National Assembly, the true representatives of the French people. They weren't just an advisory body anymore. They claimed the right to write a new constitution. This was a direct challenge to the king's absolute power. It was a declaration that sovereignty no longer rested with the monarch, but with the nation itself. The king responded by surrounding Paris with troops. The people responded by taking to the streets. The battle for France had begun. While the politicians in their powdered wigs were debating rights and constitutions, the people of Paris were facing a much more immediate crisis: hunger. A harsh winter and a poor harvest had sent the price of grain and therefore bread, the staple food of the poor, skyrocketing. A worker might spend over half of their daily wage on a single loaf of bread. There were riots in the streets, not over political philosophy, but over the price of food. When a government cannot ensure its people can eat, it loses all authority. Desperation and fear turned into anger. The people believed that the nobility were hoarding grain to starve them into submission. On July 14, 1789, that anger boiled over. A massive crowd of ordinary Parisians, hearing rumors that the king's soldiers were preparing to attack the city, decided to arm themselves. They stormed the Bastille, a medieval fortress used as a prison and an armory. They weren't looking for political prisoners. There were only a handful inside. They were looking for weapons and gunpowder to defend themselves. The storming of the Bastille was a symbolic act, the people tearing down a monument of royal tyranny. But it was driven by something far more primal: the need to survive. Economic desperation had finally turned into violent revolution. So let's be clear, the French Revolution wasn't born from abstract ideals scribbled on parchment. It was born from numbers on a balance sheet. It happened because the state was bankrupt. It happened because the tax system was designed to protect the rich and crush the poor. It happened because the elites refused to sacrifice any of their privileges for the good of the nation. And it happened because the system refused to change until it was too late. The revolution was fueled by empty pockets and empty stomachs. It was a lesson written in history. Revolutions often start when the cost of staying alive becomes higher than the cost of fighting back. In the years that followed, the old world was torn down. The monarchy was abolished, King Louis and Queen Marie Antoinette were executed, and the aristocracy was dismantled. A new republic was born, founded on the famous ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. But we must never forget the spark that lit that world-changing fire. It wasn't a philosopher's essay or a politician's speech. It was debt. It was hunger. It was the financial collapse of a nation that ran out of money, and finally, ran out of patience. The French Revolution wasn't born in politics. It was born in bankruptcy. Thanks for watching. If you found this perspective on history interesting, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. See you next time.